Good evening, everybody. Good to see you. If you want to grab your coffee and come and take your seat, we will kick back off again. We are coming to the end of this series, God at Work, where we've been thinking about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, not just in church on a Sunday or in a small group during the week, but wherever we find ourselves, whether we are at work, in the workplace, whether we are looking after family, whether we are at school, whether we are at university, wherever we are, we've been thinking, what does it mean to be an ambassador, a follower of Jesus, right where we are? And recognizing really that that's just part of what it means to be created in the image of God. God made us as human beings for work. And he created us to work, and he gave us a calling, a vocation for fruitfulness. And what that means is that there's no sacred or secular divide. So there's no sense in which some jobs are holy jobs, and some jobs are unholy jobs. Well, not all of them. So if you're a vicar like me, then God is really interested in the work that you do. And if you are a missionary, then you get a lot of brownie points with God because you've gone to Timbuktu or somewhere like that. But if you are a teacher, or if you're an entrepreneur, or if you're a designer, or a nurse, any of those things, then actually they don't count, and God's not interested in them. And what we've been looking at over these last few weeks is that's nonsense. That actually everything is spiritual. And God is calling us to join him in the renewal of everything. As he makes everything new, each of us has a part to play in that. So we all have a calling, a vocation on our lives, which I hope is great news for you and exciting, certainly exciting for me. My job as a vicar is simply to enable you to fulfill your vocations in whatever you do as followers of Jesus. Now, of course, that's all well and good, and that's exciting to think about, but then you go to work next week, on tomorrow, and what is it like on a Monday morning? Because the reality can be very different indeed, can't it? Work can feel frustrating. It can feel like toil and hardship and hard graft. It's not creative. It's not joyful. And all of that, of course, is the result of the fact we live in a broken world, in a fallen world. That's the reality that we live in. So really, if we're going to do justice to this idea that God is interested in our work, we've got to talk about work as it is, and that means we've got to talk about the stress of work as well as the vocation of work. So that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. We're going to be thinking about tackling stress and how we do that. And I don't know about you, but stress has been a reality in every job that I have done. I was a parliamentary researcher for 3 years. I was working for a member of parliament. It's only one, Rachel. It's one sweet per talk. I'm joking. So that was good. I love that. That was a good moment. Feel the power there. That was amazing. She just threw that straight back in, and you got it in the bowl as well, which is remarkable. That was a stress moment, just to have a bit of fun. Sorry, I apologize. When I was a parliamentary researcher working for an MP, and she was a MP from the northeast of England, and well done, Mick. And that was a great job in so many ways. It was fast-paced. It was high stakes. You were really making a difference. But it was a job that was intense because it was all about her. It was, I was kind of in her pockets really all the time. It was, we were always together, always working together. And my job really was to enable her to do what she needed to do. So it was like anything that needed to happen, I needed to arrange it. And sometimes that meant going back with her up to the constituency in the northeast, living with her and her family. It meant, a couple of times going and campaigning for her. So I stayed up in the northeast for 5 weeks campaigning for her. So it was incredibly intense. And she was not the easiest person to get on with. She had quite a fiery temper. She had kind of a Welsh kind of Celtic heritage, and so we clash from time to time. I remember having one enormous row, and just before I went off to campaign with her for 5 weeks, So, and that meant that there were times when I got up in the morning and I had that kind of feeling in my gut, that anxiety, that nervousness that thought, oh no, I've got to do this all over again today. And I don't know if you've been in that kind of context. That hasn't particularly changed as I got ordained in the Church of England and became a clergyman. You might think, well, actually, surely being a clergyman in the Church of England is one of the most relaxing, easy roles that you can ever possibly imagine. But it does have, stressful moments. Doesn't it, Jason? No. Your boss, for example, can be really awkward, or you can have a staff team that drives you up the wall, and just very occasionally, although of course present company absolutely excluded, members of the congregation can create a little bit of stress themselves for their vicar. And it is easy to feel frustrated. It's actually easy to feel rejected too, and wonder what it is somebody's going to come and say to you when they say, "Can I just have a word with you?" And it's easy to take that out on your family. So from time to time, I will be at home, the children will be running around like crazy things, and I'll just be angry with them because actually I'm carrying some stress with me. Or I'll be so exhausted on a Sunday afternoon at about 3 p.m. that I'm kind of comatose in the corner somewhere with them running around and Joanne kind of chasing after them. But it's not just vicars. I think all of us, I suspect, have been impacted by stress. Anybody out there never felt stressed in their life at all, ever? Kim nearly put her hand up there. That would have, and that's actually, not a surprise. You look at the 2016 Labour Force survey pulled together by the Health and Safety Executive, and it says that 11.7 million working days were lost last year through stress. That's a lot of working days, isn't it? 45% of all working days that were lost were due to stress. 37% of all work-related ill health is due to stress. If you work in the public sector, just pop your hand up for me. Bad news, people. That's the most stressful sector to be working in. Hands up if you're a teacher. That's the most stressful of all. That's why you need to. You can have another one if you like. And NHS, that's also highly stressful. Civil servants, any civil servants? No, that's another stressful place to be, probably working with politicians, I suspect. And the main reason that is given for that sense of stress tends to be deadlines, too much responsibility without the necessary resource and support that is needed, and then a lack of supervision and support from line managers and superiors. And of course, stress has an impact on our health, doesn't it? It's a serious thing. There are physical symptoms, those stomach cramps that I'm sure we've all experienced, that loss of appetite, that sleeplessness where you've got those terrible anxiety dreams that are going on and on. You're doing public speaking and you're thinking you're doing it, oh, I've forgotten to put my clothes on. It's that kind of nightmare scenario. Or that tightness around the chest where you actually find it quite difficult to breathe. But there are psychological symptoms too. It can be very difficult to concentrate because you're constantly distracted by your worries, or you have that moment where you think, oh, I've got 100 things to do, but you're paralyzed. You can't choose which one. That's all you need to do to get going, but you can't because you're overwhelmed by the volume. And so you're like a rabbit caught in the headlights and you just freeze. That's stress. Anxiety. Maybe for you, it's you become very sensitive or defensive, and kind of the prickles are out. People around you've got to be quite careful. There are psychological symptoms, and of course there are spiritual symptoms too. And by that I mean simply that we lose sight of the bigger picture, the way that the world is. And we become much more self-absorbed. Our field of vision narrows and focuses down until all we care about is this stressful scenario that we find ourselves in, and everything else vanishes from view. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, I relate to all of this, but what actually is stress? Have you ever thought about that? And we all sense that we know what it is intuitively, but what is it really? Well, stress is actually a reaction, the body's reaction that's triggered by a perceived threat. So it's a very natural, important phenomenon. Starts in the brain. If you are if you are a medic, and I get this wrong, forgive me, but the pituitary gland instructs the adrenal glands in the kidneys to pump out stress hormones into our bodies, adrenaline, cortisol, and that's in order to quicken the pulse and increase the heart rate and the blood pressure around the body, in order to take the body into a heightened state of alertness, because there is a threat around that you need to be aware of. So you will breathe faster. If you are like me, without hair, then you will probably kind of form little beads of sweat on your head. Your memories will intensify, which is a remarkable thing, but that's because the brain wants you to remember this scary moment, so that if you experience this threat again, you know that you need to run as quickly as possible because there's danger close by. And of course, because your body is on high alert, the last thing it wants you to do is sleep. So if you're lying there at night, eyes wide open, just thinking through for the 150th time what it is you're facing tomorrow, that's because your body is aware that there is a threat close by. You feel afraid, danger is sensed, and it won't let you go to sleep because then you are really vulnerable. Makes sense, doesn't it? When you see it like that. That's what stress is all about. Well, what on earth does the Bible have to say about stress? Well, we're going to look at a little chapter in, a little section in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 11. If you've got a Bible, you might want to turn to it, chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. And we're going to look at the life of Jesus and Paul a little bit and just see some practical ways in which they coped with the stress of their life before going a little bit further. So we're going to look at some practical ways in which you can manage your stress on one hand, and then we're going to look at how you can tackle your triggers. But to kick us off, let's look at Matthew 11, verse 28. I think the words are on the screen. There they are. Come to me, Jesus says, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So let's look at that first idea that we need to manage our stress. The New Testament is really very honest about the reality of stress. Jesus, for example, would you believe it? He experienced stress. Have a look at Luke chapter 8. It is a stressful day in the life of Jesus. He crosses the Sea of Galilee, so exhausted already by all of the ministry he's been engaged in, that he falls asleep in the boat, and he's clearly in a very deep sleep as this storm kind of builds around the boat and starts tossing and turning the boat. And obviously his disciples, seasoned sailors, are deeply concerned and wake him up. And he's woken up and frustrated that they don't trust him, and he calms the storm, and they get across the lake, and immediately he meets a man who is kind of demonized. He's full of demons, and confronts him, casts those demons out into a herd of pigs. The pigs then rush down the hill and are drowned in the lake, much to the fury of the local pig farmer and his friends. So the village says to Jesus, we don't want you. We're afraid of you. Leave us. So he gets back in the boat, sails across the lake again, where there's a huge crowd of people waiting to see him. He is the local celebrity. They've got loads of needs. They want him to meet those needs. And they press in on him. And one man comes up and says, please, can you come and heal my daughter? She's about to die. And Jesus says, of course. So immediately, stressful situation, he heads that way. But the crowd kind of hem in around him. And a woman touches him, and he feels power go out from him, calls out, who touched me? His disciples kind of have a moment. What are you talking about? He has a confrontation with his disciples. Somebody touch me. And this woman comes forward. You're healed. And then he hears from Jairus' servants that his daughter's died. He goes, don't worry about it. I'll come anyway. He goes. Again, they're surrounded by a crowd, weeping, wailing, professional mourners that had been brought in to mourn the death of this girl. And he says to them, she's not dead, she's just sleeping. They laugh in his face. You're an idiot. We know what a dead body looks like. We've seen them many times before. But he takes the family, they go upstairs, and this wonderful description in the Jesus Storybook Bible where the writer says that Jesus reached into death and pulled her back out again. And she comes alive again. Extraordinary day in the life of Jesus. Exhausting. Lonely. He seemed to be the only one who got it. Extraordinary demands on his time, his energy. There's travel. There's crowds pressing in on him. There's anxiety and fear. There's rejection. All sorts of things going on in this stressful day in the life of Jesus Christ. Paul didn't just have stressful days. He had a stressful life. And he wrote about it in his second letter to the Corinthian church, chapter 11. The Corinthians, they caused him a lot of stress. They were a pain in the backside. They really were. And so he's writing to them and he said, look, my life is not an easy one. And he lists what's going on in his life. He says, I work harder than everyone else. I'm in prison frequently. I've been flogged repeatedly. I've been exposed to death repeatedly, beaten 3 times, stoned to within an inch of his life. Then, after all of that, he's shipwrecked. And he's adrift at sea. He must be floating on a piece of wood, thinking to himself, what am I doing with my life? This is not good. Something's gone wrong. He's constantly on the move, he says. And then he goes through this list of those places where he is aware that he is in danger. So he says, I'm in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from opponents, in danger in the city, in danger in the county, in danger at sea. He's in danger a lot. He labors and toils without sleep. He says he has these sleepless nights. He knows hunger and thirst. He goes without. He's known colds. He hasn't had a roof over his head. And he says, above all of that, I feel the responsibility and pressure of the churches that I've planted and the struggles they're going through and the pastoral needs and the care of their leaders. What a stressful life. What are we moaning about? What am I moaning about when I think my life is stressful? Well, how did they cope with that? And what can we learn from them? Well, I think they exhibit 3 strategies that are just practical ways that we can deal with the reality of stress in our lives. And the first one is that they took control of their actions. And that's something you can do too. You can take control of your actions. Just a few thoughts. Paul was very clear that the body was the temple of the Holy Spirit. How we treat our bodies really matters. So stay healthy. Exercise regularly. Who's got a little Fitbit around their wrist? Brilliant. 10,000 steps. How are we doing today? Look at that. You can tell straight away that's pretty good going, isn't it? 5,000. Not bad. 658. Oh, right, okay, good. I was a bit worried there. That's not bad going. You've got a few more to do to a nice evening walk. And if you don't have a Fitbit, you've got a phone. It'll tell you, 10,000 steps. That's what, tends to be a good, healthy amount of movement. If you've got a Fitbit, it beeps at you and says, you've been sitting down too long. Now it's time to get up and do a little bit of exercise, which I think is really useful. Eat healthily. No more pizza, Benjay. Okay? And less pasta, more fruit and vegetables. These are good things. These help us tackle stress. Sleep longer. I find this incredibly difficult as a parent with very young children. They tend to get up at the crack of dawn. If I get up any earlier, they'll still get up that early. But actually what I can do is I can go to bed earlier. When you have when there's a lack of sleep, you feel more stressed. You deal with stress, less ably. So get an early night. Something else you can do is you can minister in the opposite spirit. And by that I mean, if there is a stressful situation you are currently in, then don't be part of the problem, be the solution. So bless those who curse you, says Paul. And he was writing to the Corinthians who were cursing him left, right, and center because they thought he was terrible. React with civility and grace when somebody is stressing you out. Refuse to contribute yourself to the stressful environment that they are creating. Serve those who stress you out. So you can take control of your actions. Second thing you can do is you can take control of your emotions. Fight your fear. Right the way through the Bible, we see don't be afraid is a commandment time after time after time. So, what's the opposite of fear? Faith. So cultivate faith, trust, learn to trust God for yourself. And that means you've got to give yourself time to prepare your mind, to prepare your heart to trust Jesus. Embrace joy. Paul, this man who had this horrendous, stressful life, managed to write to the Thessalonians in chapter 5 and say to them, be joyful always. Whatever you're facing. A couple of days ago, I was walking down Butler Road. I was only about 150 meters from my house, and I was already about to lose it with my two kids. Anastasia, who's 2, Orla, who is 3. And they had been arguing all the way up the road and with each other. And then Anastasia is in that place where it's all mum at the moment. That's the first time that's happened to me. All my kids have been daddy's girls. Anastasia is not. And so she's in that place where she just says, Mummy, do it, and then just goes, bah! And just flops down, legs are gone, and she's like a dead weight, just flopped on the pavement, in the leaves. And you're like, oh, this is now 25 minutes into our walk, and we've managed to get 200 meters, and I'm trying to get into town. And I'm about to lose it. I'm stressed. And then out of the corner of my eye, I spot a robin just on the doorpost of a gate, or the post of a gate. And we stop, and I'm like, look, girls, look, a robin. And we just have a moment of wonder together as we just enjoyed it. And it was really tame, so it stayed there for 30, 40 seconds. And I just felt my soul breathe in that moment when I just took the time to appreciate God's good creation. So celebrate life. Take an emotional break as well. That's another thing I think is important. I don't know about you, but my wife and I, we have a regular pattern of having a date night. And sometimes we make the mistake of saying, right, okay, we've had a really stressful week. Let's just hang out together and go and have a lovely meal or a drink at the pub and talk about it. And so what happens when you do that? You're chatting away and you just dredge up all that stress and frustration all over again. And you just kind of, you get angsty and frustrated and emotional, and it's not helpful. Go and watch a movie instead. Date night's brilliant, but watch a movie if you've had a stressful week, or go and watch a gig, or listen to some music that you really enjoy listening to together. Do something outside of yourself that just gives you that emotional break. So take control of your actions, take control of your emotions. Third thing you can do is you can take control of your thoughts. Think positively, says Paul. Now, positive thinking, gets a bit of a bad rap. But Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, says, whatever is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Think praise might be another way of putting it. Paul says again in that letter to the Philippians, don't be anxious about anything. Instead, pray and give thanks to God. So worship is important for us as a church, isn't it? Because it reminds us who God is and what he's done. And we're kind of singing truths over ourselves. So again, last week, Thursday night, I came home and I was cooking the dinner, but I just put on the New Wine live worship album, great album, and just been released, I think, and just had 25 minutes just with the Lord in the kitchen. And my kids occasionally come in and they think, oh, Dad's at it. And singing at the top of my voice, keeping them awake. But it was food for the soul. It was great just to reconnect with God and regain perspective and see the bigger picture for what it really is. So 3 things that we can do. Take control of your actions, take control of your emotions, take control of your thoughts. And don't forget, use scripture in that as well. I don't want to leave that off. It's important to read your Bible regularly. Understand the big picture of who God is, who you are, and what you're doing. Now, I recognize they're only strategies for helping us deal with, in many ways, the surface symptoms of stress. And right at the beginning, when we were defining stress, we said, really, there's a root cause to it. And the question is, can we deal with that root cause? And so in the last few minutes, I want us to move from managing our stress to tackling your triggers. If stress is indeed a response to a threat, then stress is ultimately about fear, isn't it? It's a kind of fear. Now, we fear lots of different things in our lives. Fear of failure is probably the prime contributor to stress. We're anxious about disappointing others, disappointing ourselves, maybe disappointing God. But that kind of fear of failure, if you think about it for a moment, is actually governed by our own perception. Expectations that we think others have of us. Expectations that we have, that we place upon ourselves. We give our own kind of ideals, don't we? We have our own standards that we want to meet and live up to. And what that means is that stress actually has its roots in the heart. And this is where our reading tonight, I think, really offers us hope. Because what Jesus is saying here, when he says, come to me, is that he's taking responsibility for us. You see, stress ultimately comes from within. We create our own burdens, don't we? We live by a set of rules and regulations. We place demands and expectations on ourselves, that sense of meeting other people's requirements, performing to meet particular targets. We root our sense of who we are, our being, in the things that we do, the success that we have, the things that we achieve. And so we live life like a Boy Scout collecting merit badges. I used to have 3 rows of badges all up and down my arm as a Cub Scout. And I was pretty proud about that. My mother was amazing at writing letters to the Scout Pack leader saying, yes, Rod has done this, Rod has done that. Now, half the time I didn't even realize I'd done it, but I stood there on the Thursday night and took the badge anyway. Mum sewed it on for me. Thank the Lord for mothers. But that gave me a strong sense of who I was. I'd achieved these things. It gave me confidence. But that's not a good way to live. Because then, you want to hear what others think of you, what God thinks of you, what you think of yourself, and it's never good enough. So you're always pushing yourself to do better, to do more, to try harder, to prove yourself. That's the root of so much stress. And Jesus offers just to take that from us. And he offers instead himself. Look what he says. Come to me, and I will give you rest, for I am gentle and humble in heart. This is personal grace that he's offering to you, that's available if you want it. It's relationship. He's saying you can be a friend of God. And he offers you his yoke, and that picture of the milkmaid is usually the way we think of yokes, isn't it? A wooden beam over the shoulder with 2 buckets hanging down with milk in it, and they kind of walk along carrying it like that. But actually, you can also get yokes where you've got kind of a double position. So Jesus here is really saying, look, I've got one of these double yokes. I'm walking with you. I'm carrying the weight alongside you. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. My yoke, he says, is easy and light. What does he mean by that? Well, what he means is he's not placing any more demands on your life. He's not asking you to meet particular standards, to keep the rules. He's saying all you need to do is trust me. Give yourself to me. Put your faith in me. Pledge your allegiance to me. Declare your loyalty to me. There are no more demands, no more pressure, no more fear. There doesn't need to be any more stress. And of course, only Jesus can do that. Because ultimately, it's not about what you do, it's about what he has done for you. Because Jesus, as the divine human being, uniting humanity with God, has lived your life for you perfectly. Jesus, the sacrificial lamb, has died your death in your place, on your behalf, where he's taken upon himself the penalty for all the things that we do wrong and God's judgment on that, on himself, where he has cleansed us from the kind of pollution and corruption that stains us and leaves us feeling ashamed, and where he has raised with him, he's raised us to new life in Christ, where we can experience resurrection power that sets us free from the sin in our life that was so powerful it seemed to enslave and entrap us. Ultimately, he offers a humanity united with him, of which we, each of us, can be a part. And of course, that changes everything, doesn't it? We're adopted into his family. You and I, we can be sons and daughters of God, heirs and co-heirs with Jesus, sitting at his right hand, enjoying that place of intimacy and honor. As his family, we can be at peace with God. That is who we are as followers of Jesus. And that means that we can be resilient and deal with any stressful situation that is thrown at us. That's how Jesus did it. So right before Jesus experienced any of the stress of his ministry, he was baptized in the River Jordan, and God spoke to him. And he said these words, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." Jesus was resilient because he knew who he was. Paul knew the same thing. He wrote to the Galatian Christians and he said, "I no longer live, but Christ lives in me." He was resilient because he knew who he was. Do you know who you are? I pray you do. Let's stand.